Good afternoon, everybody. We will now call this meeting of the General Governance Committee to order. This meeting of the General Government Committee is being held in a hybrid meeting format with virtual in-person participation by members of the public, staff, and council. This meeting is also being live streamed and may be viewed online at ajax.ca/live. A friendly reminder to all participants to please use their microphone at all times for the benefit of those participating in council chambers and joining remotely. I'll now call this meeting to order. We will do attendance first. Did you do that? No? I just came from the region. Mayor Collier sends his regrets. He is on municipal business right now. I'll start with the land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas, more specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is, and will continue to be, home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to the adoption of minutes. Can I get a mover? I see Councillor Tyler Morin. That the minutes of September, for the regular meeting, September 11th, 2023 be passed. All in favor? And that passes.
Mr. Chair,
Can't we just do it?
we need to vote using
You're so,
technology.
we had it. We had it, man. Okay, moving on then. For the consent agenda, we have item 4.1 pulled. Does anybody want to pull 4.2? Seeing none then, can I get a mover for? Okay, all items have been pulled. We'll start with item 4.1. We have Regional Councillor Crawford pulling.
Thank you. Through you to Director Valentine, my only question on this report is basically at the financial implication point, the very last point, to allow the town to plan for funding for future phase-in discounts currently estimated at $10.6 million over the next 4 years. Can you just explain that line on how you would be planning for that funding?
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Crawford. So within this report, we've identified that under the new legislation, the development charge legislation, there's a mandatory phase-in on the charge. So the first year of the charge, we would have to discount by 20%, the second year 15%. By us not moving forward with a new bylaw at this time, we do not have to do any phase-in. But on our next DC study and DC bylaw, we would be required to phase in that charge. What we've calculated here based on current calculated figures is we would be in a deficit of $10.6 million versus our current charge. So what we would need to do is identify how we would pay that money back into the DC reserve. So this just allows us a little extra time to identify how we would accommodate that moving forward for the next DC bylaw.
And in your understanding, when the government talks about making us whole, is it this part of the DC charges, the lack of the charges coming to the municipality, that the making us whole would be applying to?
Through the chair, so that this is part of it. Also through Bill 23, the different discounted rates for different units that have 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom will be required to provide DC discounts on those, as well as a new affordable definition. There will be exemptions and discounts that we as a municipality will have to track. We cannot then have the developer pay those amounts back, so it's on the tax base then that we have to replenish any exemptions or discounts coming out of that that change to the legislation.
And my understanding is the affordable housing definition has been given to us, but not the attainable. Is that right?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those were my questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Tyler Moran.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, right at the front of this report, it just says here, background, and then item number 1 where it says remove exemptions for the town's 2 CIP, Community Improvement Plan areas. My question is, does that mean that development charges weren't being collected when a development was put into that area? Can you somehow just explain what that means? Maybe what it was and what it is now?
Through the chair to Councillor Tyler Moran. So the background that's provided here, there were changes in legislation back in 2020 that allowed for these 4 items to be modified, and we did bring forward an amendment to the DC bylaw back in 2020, which addressed those pieces. So there are exemptions, there were exemptions in our bylaw for these various things, and we took them out in 2020.
So, thank you for that. So if, say the downtown area or the village area has a development, that development pays DC charges same way as if it was in any other part of the town?
Through the chair, at this point, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions or comments from council? Seeing none then, I'll need a mover. We have Regional Councillor Crawford moving and call to vote. And that passes. Next, we have item 4.2, the library reserve balances. We have Councillor Henry.
Thank you, through the chair. My question is very quick. With regards to the meeting that we had last week, as I am assuming you've had with all of staff. And my question, and I apologize, I lost my notes. So my question is going to be a little bit raw. You can fill in the blanks for me. The amount that you said that it costs you for security, for the library, for the main branch. Could you elaborate on that? And I'd like to know more about how this pertains to the budget, if possible.
Through the chair, while this report doesn't talk about the library's budget as it pertains to security, to answer your question directly, I believe you're referring to the library's 2024 budget request in terms of additional security. And so we estimate that we will need an additional $69,000 in additional security coverage to cover additional security needed from November to March, as well as to fund a cost-sharing gap that we're no longer able to utilize with the town Monday through Friday.
Councillor Henry, I keep the questions to the reserves, if that's okay.
That's okay. That was my only question.
Okay,
That
thank
was
you.
it. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Sarah. So can I get a mover for this, please? Seeing Councillor Bauer, we'll call to vote. And that passes. Moving on to items 5, we have no discussion. Item 6.1, the street naming bylaw update. We have Jeff Romanowski. Just a note for council. This is no final decision to be made today. This is more of an information for us. We don't necessarily have to make a decision on this. So Director Romanowski, please.
Thank you, Chair Lee. I'll turn it over to Joyce Chen, who's got a brief presentation to go through the Phase 1 background for the street naming bylaw update. Joyce?
Okay, good afternoon, members of the committee and staff. My name is Joyce Chen. I'm a planner in Planning and Development Services. I'm here today to present this street naming bylaw update. The requirement for the street naming update comes from the 2022-2026 Strategic Plan, Action 26, as an action within the Connecting Our Community pillar for town staff to undertake. The street naming bylaw update will be conducted in 3 phases, with Phase 1 highlighted in red, which staff completed, is the background research and identification of the street naming options in other municipalities and the formulation of street naming options for the town. The next step is highlighted by the gray dash box. This is Phase 2, the street naming options consultation. This is where staff are looking to receive feedback from the public and stakeholders on the 5 street naming options. The staff will report and present feedback received during consultation to council for council's feedback on a preferred street naming option. Phase 3, street naming bylaw finalization and adoption. This would be based on the street naming option selected by council to prepare an updated street naming bylaw accordingly. Staff would forward the bylaw to council for adoption. At this time, staff are seeking approval from council to proceed with consultation on the 5 street naming options. A brief history of the town's street naming. The town street naming convention was introduced on September 22, 1958, when Ajax Council passed a resolution to name streets after the naval officers and crew members that served on the HMS Ajax. The town of Ajax has a long-standing street naming practice that is unique and set apart from other urban areas in the town, as the town is named in honor of the HMS Ajax, one of the 3 Allied British warships which fought in the Battle of the River Plate in the Second World War. As you can see on the right side of the slide, the 3 ships from the Battle of the River Plate. In addition to the naming of the town, the streets were named after 2 of the other ships. In 1997, bylaw number 103-97 was passed, requiring the naming of municipal streets in the town after the Second World War veterans that served on the HMS Ajax. The town's naming practice was later expanded to include names of veterans from HMS Exeter and HMS Achilles during the Battle of the River Plate, and those that were brought aboard and served on the 8th HMS Ajax during its visit to the town in 1976. Since the town's naming convention was adopted in 1958, Ajax has been reported on a local, national, and international scale with numerous articles written about how the town names its streets. These news outlets and organizations include, locally, the Ajax News Advertiser and Insaga, nationally, the Toronto Sun, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, and TVO. Internationally, the Royal Canadian Legion, British Royal Navy, and other veterans associations such as the HMS Ajax and River Plate Veterans Association. The town has over 800 streets named after veterans using the town street naming convention. Town staff maintain a street name reserve list, which currently has approximately 150 names remaining. New names added are approved by the Region of Durham to ensure there are no duplications elsewhere in the region and are signed through new plans of subdivision or as needed. As mentioned earlier, staff have completed a comparison of procedures in other municipalities. Based on the comparisons, staff have developed 5 street naming options that the town can explore further through consultation. These 5 options are: Option 1, status quo. Keep the existing street naming convention the same and continue to use the approved street names from the street name reserve list to preserve the town's historical link to the Second World War. Examples of current street naming are provided on the right side of the slide, with the street the veteran is named after, followed by a ship icon. Option 2, expand naming to include Canadian War veterans from Ajax that served in the Second World War beyond the Battle of the River Plate. This can involve adding poppies to new street signs to symbolize the veteran. Examples on the right include, the top image is in Oshawa. This is a street named after a Canadian War veteran, and also in Barrie, which is the bottom image, and these are the street names after Canadian War veterans. Option 3, expand naming to include Indigenous names and names of other individuals or groups of cultural significance relating to Ajax. This option will require extensive consultation and research with Indigenous groups and the community. Examples on the right side of the slide include the top image, Indigenous street naming in Montreal, English translation to brotherhood, group of people, or nations sharing commonalities like values and beliefs, which could loosely be translated as our relations, equality among people in the Mohawk language. And the bottom image, Indigenous street naming in Vancouver. This is the English translation in the traditional language of the Musqueam First Nation. Option 4, hybrid ceremonial street naming. This option would continue with existing street naming convention with added ceremonial naming. Ceremonial naming adds a secondary name signifying a particular person or area of importance, but does not legally change the name of the existing street. On the right side of the slide, examples are provided of what this could look like. The top two images are in Toronto. The top left is the Indigenous name. The top right is in honor of the anniversary of Aga Khan's accession and contribution to culture and heritage. And the bottom two examples are from the States. Bottom left is to honor an individual, Muhammad Ali, and the bottom right is to honor a group and history of a region. The ceremonial names are signified by a different color nameplate, a symbol, or font. In Ajax, this can be applied to arterial roads. If this option is selected, any Indigenous-related or cultural individuals, names, events, organizations, and concepts will be required to undergo specific consultation and research. An existing town committee, such as the Heritage Advisory Committee or a new naming advisory committee, could be established for reviewing nominations, researching significance, and recommending ceremonial names. Option 5, hybrid commemorative naming. This option would keep the existing street naming convention, expand the use of commemorative naming beyond municipal buildings and parks, which is the town's current practice. Commemorative naming in this option would be the official naming of buildings, parks, and other municipal assets decided upon by the town to commemorate or honor an individual and/or organization from Ajax or with strong ties to Ajax that has made significant historical contributions to the community or from the Indigenous community. This can be expanded to include commemorative naming of areas and/or rooms within a library or a municipal building, a sports field, a bridge, walkway, and/or trails, and so forth. Examples are shown on the slide. If this option is selected, any Indigenous-related and community individuals, names, events, organizations, and concepts will be required to undergo specific consultation and research with Indigenous groups and community groups. If this option is selected, staff would also work to update the town's commemorative naming of municipal parks and buildings policy. If directed by council, and in my opinion, IMO page will be created with an online survey for feedback on the street naming options. As some of the street naming options mentioned earlier involve an opportunity for Indigenous naming, staff will consult with Indigenous groups and stakeholders on the options. Staff will also investigate potential costs within each option to report back to council. Additionally, staff are interested in hearing from members of council on the street naming options. The street addressing bylaw is also being updated with the street naming bylaw. The street addressing bylaw was last updated in 2011 and will be revised to include secondary street addressing as part of Farm 911, also known as the Emily Project, which is a project to assist emergency responders in finding and quickly accessing larger farm properties with multiple entrances. It is an initiative that the town has partnered with Durham Region to implement. As part of the initiative in 2022, the town assigned municipal addresses and installed signs to secondary access points on larger farm properties and 3 municipal parking lots on Lake Driveway West. The bylaw will also be updated to provide clarity on addressing vacant properties and additional dwelling units. Next steps. Consultation is expected to commence in the fall. Staff anticipate the completion of the update with a report back to council in early 2024. Following that, staff will update and forward the street naming bylaw and addressing bylaw to council for approval in 2024. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. First up, we have Councilor Tyler Moore.
Oh, okay. Didn't realize that was first. Thank you for your presentation. Straight through the chair to you, option 5, which sort of denoted that we could do a lot of different things. But currently, we're doing flagpoles, we're doing garden prayer areas. Like we're already doing that. We're doing crosswalks. would you say that option 5 expands on that? Because we're already doing some things, right?
Through the chair to Councillor Tyler Morin, yes, with option 5, we can expand it to include those assets as well.
So right now, we do have a healing garden, we do have crosswalks, we do have flagpoles. But for us to go even further, let's say buildings, let's say parks, to honor, let's say, our Indigenous friends, you're saying there needs to be a change, or are we able to do that now
Through
in the
chair-
bylaw?
Yes, so in the policy for the commemorative naming of buildings and parks, that is already in there
Oh, it is. So,
to be able to name those assets.
so just so I'm clear, you're saying now we know we can do Indigenous healing areas, we know we can do flagpoles, we know we can do crosswalks, but you're saying we can also right now, if we chose to, name the new library makerspace. We could name that as well without a policy change. Like right now, that's in our.
No, it is
capacity.
not.
Oh, it's not.
No,
So buildings are different, and parks would be.
those are in the policy currently. However, the other additional items to be named would need to
Okay.
result in a policy change.
Let me ask my question differently. What are we allowed to do now?
So right now, we're allowed to name municipal buildings and parks.
So I'm going to help you out here because ultimately there is a degree of confusion because it is a street naming policy, but in option 5, because I did have the same question,
Yes.
we're now including rooms and buildings.
Yes, so,
So it seems they're going outside specifically street naming.
yeah, so to the chair. So if we wanted to expand without having to, rename all the streets and include Indigenous and cultural components, then this is an option which will allow for the town to be able to do that by naming, additional like rooms or other
Sure.
assets.
Councilor Dunmore, I wouldn't overthink it too much. I think they're just kind of giving us guidelines for now, and we can give our feedback during consultation.
Okay, I'll leave it. Thank you.
And next we have Councilor Henry.
Thank you through the chair. One question, and the question is, when you mention an IMO page, and we're going to be taking information from residents, how do we know in an IMO page, and I don't know how it's going to be set up, this is why I'm asking, that we'll be getting correspondence feedback from our residents in the town of Ajax and only within that perimeter?
So through the chair to Councillor Henry, with the IMO page, it will be a specific page set up that's specific to the street naming update. This will allow for parameters that we can add with the online survey that could ask, where they're located so that we know we are getting feedback directly from the residents in Ajax.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. I want to know that we're getting the feedback from
Yes.
our own residents
Yes.
and that we're not getting outside influence as to how others feel about this project.
Yes, and additionally, other people can comment, but we will be able to filter that out.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Councilor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Ms. Chen. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. So I just want to confirm that once the consultation happens and you're gathering all the info, is it possible that there could be a combination result? So for example, we pick option 1, 2, and 3 and combine that.
So through the chair to Councillor Bauer, that is correct. It really depends on the direction that consultation heads in. If there is a strong desire that, something works from one option over another, or if there's another hybrid option that comes out of that, then that is definitely something that can be accommodated. We are not limited to these 5 options.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's my question, Chair Lee.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none then, can I have someone move the recommendations? I have Councilor Bauer, and we'll call to vote. And that passes. Next we have Director Romanowski with a verbal waterfront erosion EA update. I'm sure you'll have nothing but good news for us, right?
I will not be giving the update. I believe Mr. Ruddy's here,
Perfect.
and TRCA will be giving the update as they're the leads on this project. So I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Please.
Good afternoon, members of committee and council. My name is Stephen Ruddy. I'm the Manager of Development Engineering in the Planning and Development Services Department. I'm here today with TRCA to give an update on the waterfront environmental assessment, which is investigating the erosion along the Lake Ontario waterfront and is recommending mitigation measures. As I'm sure you're all aware, recent high water levels in Lake Ontario, combined with wind and wave action, has caused several sections of the waterfront trail to erode into the lake. The erosion has always been a reality, but is now starting to impact infrastructure. This is only an update, and while we are presenting recommendations here today, they are by no means final. None of the recommendations are in the current capital budget or the long-range capital forecast. Any future projects that come out of this EA when it is completed will have to go through the normal budget process. I'll hand it over to TRCA, who are going to be joining virtually, and will take us through the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have as we go or at the end. Thanks. Natasha?
Thank you very much, Stephen. As Stephen introduced, my name is Natasha Gibson. I'm a Senior Project Manager in TRCA's Erosion Risk Management Division, and I'll be providing the presentation today. And I think
Just give us a quick second. We're going to pull that up for you.
yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Natasha, if you could try to share your screen one more time.
Sure.
Yep, it's just waiting for you to select the window that you would like to share. There you go.
We can see it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Apologies for that. Okay. I'll jump right into it then. Thank you, everybody. So a quick agenda. Today I'm going to be going over the project background for our environmental assessment, the parts that we've completed so far and the next steps that will be coming up. I'll talk about some of the concept designs that we've prepared in support of this project already that are still going through the discussion process and public consultation process. And then I'll finish off by talking about each reach of the shoreline, each section of the shoreline, and what the current recommended alternatives are based on our progression thus far. So for a little bit of background, the project area does capture the entire Ajax shoreline that is also under TRCA's jurisdiction, which goes from about Frisco Road in the west to Ontario Boulevard in the east. It's divided into a couple of different phases. Phase 1 is complete, and that was our baseline data collection phase to figure out the information that we had on hand already and what was still outstanding to support an EA. Phase 2, of course, is the environmental assessment process itself, started up in 2022 and projected to finish in 2024, and that's the development of and selection of recommended alternatives. The project team is to the right, has representatives from TRCA, Town of Ajax, and our two consultants, Baird and Grounded Engineering. Here's just a couple of photos showing the existing conditions of the shoreline as it is now, showing some of the areas of focus where we are seeing active erosion and we are seeing impacts to some existing infrastructure. As Stephen alluded to earlier, this is an environmental assessment process, which means no decisions have been made and there is no commitment to funding or detailed designs or anything beyond the development of these concepts so far. So far we've developed some concept alternatives. These alternatives have gone to the public in May of this year. We've since refined some of those alternatives based on the feedback that we did receive from the public, and we're looking to go to the public again in January 2024 with those updated concepts. After that, we'll be preparing an environmental study report, which will go through review and finish the EA process. There will be other steps along this process that we'll be back to council for more information or for feedback on funding, detail, design, and construction. But all of those are definitely in the future. I'll go through what our concept design options are, and I will go through those fairly quickly. They're mostly going to be a visual representation. So as I noted, they're still being refined. They haven't gone through our second round of consultation just yet. We've developed 6 options in total, and those were all evaluated, and only some of those are recommended for implementation in the future. And we did want to balance mitigating the erosion where it is critical to do so, while also preserving the natural shoreline and preserving some of the natural sediment inputs that are important for the health of Lake Ontario. Some of the options that we considered were an offshore breakwater with gaps, a hardened structure set away from the shoreline. Nearshore reefs, a submerged structure that goes up against the shoreline and is not visible under regular conditions. Groins with beach fill, intended to trap material between the groins to make a beach of sand or cobble or smaller size structures. A cobble boulder beach, which can exist as a spectrum. The image on the left shows a natural cobble boulder beach that is currently existing around Veterans Point Gardens. And the image to the right shows an engineered cobble beach that is one of TRCA's structures. So it can range from more natural accretion of material to something that is more robustly engineered, depending on the exact conditions along the shoreline. And then we have a conventional revetment, armor stone revetment. Option number 6, I'll go into a little bit more detail because it does talk about the balance of protecting the shoreline and hardening the shoreline where required, while also protecting existing conditions, for example, natural bank swallow habitat in the bluffs themselves. We've called this a combination of shoreline monitoring and do nothing, as in some cases, the negative impacts of completing the work don't necessarily outweigh the positive impacts of doing the work, but there is some amount of erosion, and we do recommend keeping an eye on those areas. The next few slides show an example of what the do nothing option would look like along the shoreline. So there's a couple of different lines here, and I suggest taking a look around Reach 1 to those are the most separated to give you an idea of what those lines are. This purple line above Reach 1 just gives you the reach length. That one's not really important for this image, but this pink line shows the existing stable top of slope. So if we were to put toe protection in immediately, this is approximately where we would expect the top of slope to be. The blue line represents that same slope line in approximately 25 years, and the green in 100. So if we do nothing for 25 years, this is where we can expect the top of slope to be. I've highlighted a couple of spots that are of interest. Rotary Park Pavilion, for example, part of the pavilion itself will be impacted by where the top of slope is within 100 years, and the trail would be lost within 25 years. Versus the parking lot just to the east is not anticipated to be impacted even within 100 years. Along Reach 5, there are a couple of sections as well where parts of the parking lot are expected to be lost within 100 years and the waterfront trail lost within 25 years, as well as points of Veterans Point Gardens. Continuing along the shoreline, things are a little bit more stable here. We do have no erosion along Reach 7, but it is recommended that we continue maintenance of those structures that are existing going forward to make sure that they are still functional. And Paradise Beach and beyond to Carruthers Marsh and just to the east, we're seeing limited to no erosion, where even in 100 years, Ashbury Playground is not anticipated to be impacted from the top of slope. And now I'll go through each of these reaches one by one to talk about what our proposed alternative is. First, I'll talk about how the reaches were determined. So we wanted to ensure consistency in existing conditions between each of these reaches so we could recommend an appropriate solution for that particular area. So we consider things like what environmental concerns were around, whether or not there were wetlands or other protected areas, what infrastructure was adjacent, the height of the bluffs, and the rates of erosion, for example, to make sure that we're recommending an option that works for the whole reach. This is a map showing all those 12 reaches along the shoreline. It also includes a color-coded system where the light blue represents areas that, well, there may be erosion happening. It is not an imminent impact to infrastructure, where Reach 3 and Reach 5 are more imminent, recommended for implementation sooner rather than later. In our EA process, we've identified these two, Reach 3 and Reach 5, as recommended for implementation within 10 years. But again, this is just the EA process and pending funding and budget approval. Here's a map showing the long-term plan in its current state for reaches 1 through 7. So again, for information purposes only at this point, it's not an official plan until the EA is approved. We're looking at a combination of shoreline monitoring in green. The do nothing also has a recommendation for shoreline monitoring, but those are instances where erosion is not observed, and the shoreline monitoring is for interest in information, but we're not expecting any amounts of significant erosion like we might be for some of the shoreline monitoring portions. We also have an offshore breakwater shown in gray, and then the Cobble and Boulder Beach shown in orange. So then that's again that variation where it would be the more engineered, robust option in areas that are more critical and has the ability to be a little bit more naturalized, less engineered in areas that are less critical. And it's the same plan here for the eastern part of the shoreline, mostly shoreline monitoring or do nothing along this section with some continuation of the Cobble and Boulder Beach and another set of offshore breakwaters. My last few slides that I'll go through just basically show an image representing the existing conditions along each reach, as well as some symbology showing the relative impact based on our analysis to date of implementing these options. So for reach 1, we're recommending shoreline erosion monitoring. We're expecting to have positive economic, environmental, and physical impact. So I won't go through each of these as there's 12 of them and it takes quite a bit of time, but I'll move through these slides and call out the highlights as we move through. Reach 2 recommendation is do nothing, primarily because of the wetland and desire to protect it. Reach 3 at Rotary Park Pavilion, recommendation is an offshore breakwater, and that is because that does provide a robust erosion protection and maintains access to the beach in this area. Reach 4 recommendation is a Cobble and Boulder Beach. Reach 5 is also a Cobble Boulder Beach. Since this risk is more imminent, it's likely that this would be more heavily engineered than the version that we would see in Reach 4, but all of this will be determined during any detailed design phases. Reach 6 recommended a shoreline erosion monitoring because that existing Cobble Boulder Beach is doing a good job, as you can see in this picture, of allowing vegetation to establish on the slope and providing erosion protection. Reach 7 has existing infrastructure, but we do recommend continuation of the Cobble Boulder Beach here to provide extra tow protection to ensure the longevity of this structure. Reach 8 is another continuation of the Cobble Boulder Beach, and it starts to tie in to mimic some existing conditions along the eastern end. Reach 9 is our last offshore breakwater, and it again maintains any access to the shoreline and does provide that more robust erosion protection option. Reach 10 is Paradise Beach, and we recommend shoreline erosion monitoring. Reach 11 is Carruthers Marsh, and we recommend do nothing, again with that monitoring program being beneficial to monitor some of those natural changes in the shoreline as a result of the wetland. And Reach 12 is also recommended for shoreline erosion monitoring due to the fact that even within 100 years, the stable top of slope is not expected to actually reach the playground area, and impacts to the trail can be addressed through localized trail realignment as necessary. And lastly, I'll end on some of our next steps. So as I had mentioned, we're currently in the process of refining our conceptual designs to go to the public for January of next year for our second round of consultation. So we're refining those concepts now. Should public opinion be positive and supportive in our next round, we'll complete our environmental study report with aims of submitting that in late spring 2024 to summer 2024 with project approval by the middle of 2024. And that's it. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions, or Steve will be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you for your presentation. We have Councillor Tyler Moran.
Thank you, Chair. In beautiful Ward 3, I'm noticing, I'm assuming that this blue line all along the shoreline on the reach location and priority map, so anything past number 57, by the way, thank you for your presentation, Ms. Gibson. Very, very relevant. So on the east side of number 57, I'm assuming that doesn't fall under the TRCA umbrella because those are private homes, correct?
That is actually where our jurisdiction, through the chair, sorry, that is actually where our TRC's jurisdiction would end. And yes, the private properties were not.
Okay, and I see the blue line going all the way there, so maybe that's good news. Maybe I can turn my question now to Mr. Ruddy. So does that area beyond 57 to the east, all the way over to, I guess, Lake Ridge on Ontario Road and all those homes there, does that fall under the town's umbrella, or again, that's private property, they just deal with things themselves?
Through the chair, that area is under CLOCA's jurisdiction, so Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, as opposed to the TRCA. So they would still, even though they are privately owned, that waterfront, they would still be subject to the regulations of the Conservation Authority.
Okay, and if there was anything put in, like we're seeing here, these breakwaters, cobblestones, all those types of things, and if it was assessed that those homes over there and their properties were also eroding in 25 years, it'll be 10 feet up, et cetera, would CLOCA then, the province, be sort of under their umbrella to put in those kind of pieces?
Through the chair, I don't believe so. All the erosion protection that's gone in there has been done privately by the homeowners.
Really? Okay.
I don't believe there's been a government, initiative to take care of the erosion on those private properties.
Interesting. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Next we have Regional Councillor Dyes.
Thank you. Looking at the offshore breakwater around Rotary Park, and I know we've had a lot of erosion down there, and our building's close to the shoreline, which is the issue. Would that breakwater be on its own, or does it have sort of like an arm or any kind of attachment to the shoreline?
Through the chair to Councillor Dyes, short answer, no. There wouldn't be a connection. I think if there was, it would be more like a groin,
Okay.
as opposed to the offshore breakwater. And we also did look at a revetment there, which would have been hardening of the shoreline itself as opposed to it being offshore. But that option would really take away from the recreational use of that beach there. So we thought that this option was good for this location, given the importance of the infrastructure and balancing that with the use.
So what do you mean by recreational usage? People walking along the beach here when it permits?
Through the chair, yes, that's what I mean, is people accessing the waterfront. Yeah.
So would it not, why did you, or you probably did, but why could you not use a cobble beach there to protect that the bluff at the bottom in particular from eroding any further, and some naturalization on the bluff? Would that not help?
Through the chair, yeah, that was an option that was looked at. I think that option would still be feasible. It's just balancing the impact on the soft sand beach there with bouldering it up. So it's really, what do we want there, and that's why we want to gather input to make sure we're proposing what is going to work best once everybody looks at it.
My last question is, from going out on tours with TRCA previously along the shoreline, we had sort of a discussion about how there were many large boulders removed from the lake, not necessarily on the shore, but from the lake, which helped also prevent, you know, the erosion. Can we not do that kind of thing rather than do a whole sort of breakwater approach?
Through the chair, that's definitely an option. It has been noted at our public meeting that there used to be a lot more heavy material down at the waterfront, and a lot of it had been removed historically for various reasons. But I think you can see that natural cobble beach just by walking a little east along that beach. It is there. It is natural, that type of shoreline, and it already does exist there. So it's definitely an option, and I think that's why we moved towards a cobble boulder beach for the majority of the sections, because that kind of fits in and mimics what's there naturally.
So are we going to have a discussion on raking away the cobblestones on that cobble beach? Because we had that discussion sort of in the last tour we did with TRCA, and I think that prevents further erosion, if I'm not mistaken.
Through the chair, raking the beach, from what I gather from the coastal engineer that we hired for this, is that material, when you remove it, then you're more likely to lose the small material like the sand. So by raking the beach, we're increasing the migration of sand away from the beach over time.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Reddy. Thank you, Ms. Gibson. Very interesting. Can you just explain to me, in the report, starts on page 37, so each reach has its breakdown. Just please explain to me again on the left-hand side what those factors actually mean and the significance of the check marks and the number of check marks. And then also at the top of each picture, there's the box with the number of years. So reach one says 40 plus years. Does that mean the action will provide protection for 40 plus years, or what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer those questions through the chair. Essentially, for slide 37, for example, the number of years is actually the recommended number of years before erosion protection should be considered within that range. So for example, reach 1, 40 plus years means you could go approximately 40 years before implementing shoreline erosion control structures before you would have significant loss of infrastructure. So that doesn't include things like a localized trail realignment. It does include substantial trail realignment or loss of infrastructure that cannot be easily relocated, like Rotary Park Pavilion. So that provides our rough timeline for implementation.
Okay.
And along the left-hand side, all of those different items that you see there, environmental impacts are impacts to aquatic and terrestrial habitat primarily, which is more important to protect in areas like wetlands, maybe less important to protect in areas that already have a cobble boulder beach. Physical impacts, what is physically around, whether or not the bluffs are high enough to be more substantial or more iconic than other parts along the shoreline, or if there are any protected areas. For example, Carruthers Marsh is a provincially significant wetland, among other things. The cultural impacts are impacts to social impacts, so things like public use of the recreational trail, use of the public for public beaches, or access to recreational amenities. Economic is just cost for implementation and maintenance, so considers cost of implementing a structure, maintaining a structure, also some costs for how likely trail realignment is to be if we don't implement shoreline protection. And technical is how good of a job it does protecting the shoreline as well as how constructible it is. Some structures are easier to implement than others over these ranges. And in some areas, the protection, the need for engineering protection is a lot greater. So I think that answered all of your questions, but please let me know if I missed anything.
Yes, thank you very much. And just the difference versus a 1, 2, or 3 check mark.
Sure. Through the chair, the 1 check mark roughly aligns to a low positive impact, 2 is a medium positive impact, and 3 is a high positive impact.
Okay.
None of these ranked very substantially in negative, and just to make it a little bit easier and more simple, everything was kept a positive. The ones that ranked more negatively were not suggested as the preferred alternative. They were outranked by the preferred.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me, yeah, that's it. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chairley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Next is Councillor Henry.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you both for your presentation. I want to get to the cost of this. So first of all, I'd like to ask, are we looking at doing all these implementations within one term of council? What are we talking here for I see offshore monitoring, offshore breakwaters. Are we looking at doing all this in one term of council?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry, short answer, I would say probably not, given the impacts, but we don't know. You know, once this is filed, we could bring forward several projects through the capital budget process, and if we wanted to proceed with them, we could. It would be challenging because I think some of the numbers are fairly large.
That's my second question. Let's talk about costs, because when we came to see, when Regional Councillor Crawford and I came to see your presentation, and at the end I asked costs, and my mouth dropped to the floor. Are we talking about 32? What are we talking about here for the offshore breakwater with the gaps?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. Yes, through the chair, we have a range of rough order estimates for some of these structures. They do range and they are very variable, so they should be taken with a grain of salt. But right now, we're looking at the offshore breakwater to be around the $32,000 per meter.
Per meter.
Costing per meter, yes. And the Cobble Boulder Beach to be around the $31,000 per meter. But again, that doesn't consider the range of the Cobble Boulder Beach that we're looking at now in areas where it can be less robust, less engineered. That cost would be lower, and the more that we can source boulders and cobbles beforehand, that rough costing may be lower as well. And just to contrast that, the revetment option, which is the most robust from an erosion protection and probably the most negative from an environmental protection, is $33,000 per meter. So the range is all very close to the $30,000 per meter range for all of these options other than the do nothing.
So this is what I have from my meeting, and I just want to verify that I heard you correctly. Offshore breaker water with gaps, 32,000 per meter. Nearshore reefs was 27,000 per meter. To fill in the beach was 24,000 per meter. Cobble boulders, 31,000 per meter, correct? And the conventional revetment, which is 33 per meter, $33,000 per meter, correct? And okay, so for the offshore breaker, breakwater, how many meters are we looking at for this area that you
Sure.
want?
Through the chair, there's two options we're looking for the offshore breakwater. One is 110 meters along Reach 3, and then the other is 220 meters along Reach 9. But do note that Reach 3 is the only one that's recommended for implementation within the next 10 years. Reach 9 is recommended for implementation sometime within the next 10 to 40 years. So there's quite a large difference in when implementation could occur.
Understood. So we'll just stick with the first one, which is Reach 3, 110 meters at 32,000 per meter, correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. That is the rough estimate.
Excellent. So when we do consultation, you said with the public, that's correct. That's the next stage that's coming up. Will these price points be added in with the recommendations to the public?
Through the chair, in terms of what is going to go into that public consultation, that still be determined. They will have access to all of that costing in the report available to them online for sure. And I do just want to caveat that that is a rough estimation of costing, and that is subject to change during detailed design because it does vary based on the exact site conditions. and it's quite difficult until we have detailed designs to get a more accurate costing.
Understood, but I think it's only fair that we're going into a budget process coming up, that, that we, if we're asking folks to choose what they think, and we have the ultimate decision as the council, that we at least put some kind of metrics out there of what it could cost, a rough estimate, to give folks something to measure this by. I think that's only fair. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And I understand what you're saying, costs could change. Totally understood. So the most, would you say that currently what your most recommendation, what is the perceiving most dangerous part that we need to address the most is the offshore breaker waters? Is that the area that you are, like, if you could choose only one today, would that be the spot that we have to protect, because if we don't, it's going to cause irreparable damage? Is that what we're looking at?
Through the chair, I would say that that is probably one of the higher priority, but the environmental assessment will prioritize each of the sections as well as part of the final ESR document. So there will be a priority listing of kind of an order of operations, order of most severe. And I would anticipate this one would probably be the most severe one because of the infrastructure that's potentially within the zone of erosion in the future.
Okay, so through the chair, I don't know if I can request this or not, but I'm going to put it out there and someone could tell me you can't do this. So my request would be that if we're going to the general public and we're going to ask them what you prefer, that we give them costs, we tell them the order in which we see where it's the most severe, and ask them in that whole opinion piece. That's my comments back to staff. Do what you will with it, but I don't think everybody is an expert in this field, as you folks are. And I think to break it down and let them know how the budget impacts will play out is only fair, because we are going through a budget process coming up. And of course, we want to save the shoreline. We have to balance these things. So please take that back, as I mean this in the most respectful way. I'd also, in closing, I'd just like to verify that you all received, well, not all, but in your department, the email from Gordon McPherson, who we met at your presentation. You did receive that, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry, yes, we received the email from Mr. McPherson, yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to go into reading it because it's quite lengthy, as we both know. And for those watching at home or on the panel or on the council who don't know who he is, Gord has a very extensive knowledge in this background, and I believe worked with TRCA, correct, for a number of years, and knows our staff here at the town of Ajax, has a good working relationship with them as well. So I just wanted to make sure that that was entered into all the information that you had on your side. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff or TRCA? Seeing none, I don't think we have to approve anything, so thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, we have a 5-minute recess? No, we're okay? Next, we have a verbal presentation on the strong mayor powers, and I believe Mr. McWilliam will be giving that.
All right, I think I'm doing double duty here today, but we'll make it work. Okay, members council, so I'm here today to talk about part 6.1 of the Municipal Act, better known as the Strong Mayor Powers portion that was recently enacted by the province of Ontario. Ajax is now one of 26 municipalities in the province of Ontario whose whose mayors enjoy the powers that have been laid out by the provincial government. So today, just a quick overview of what we'll talk about. So first and foremost, the legislative and regulatory context, just to help council understand kind of where we are in the different documents or regulations that apply. We'll talk briefly about the new strong mayor powers, including the power to provide directions to staff, the legislative powers, administrative and political structure powers, and budget powers that are afforded to the mayor. And then I'll talk briefly about mayoral vacancies, because that's another item that I think has kind of largely gone unnoted as part of this entire process. And it does have some implications for municipalities in the event of a vacancy in that position. So first and foremost, there's kind of two bills that are relevant to this discussion. First is Bill 3, the Strong Mayors and Building Homes Act, which was adopted in 2022. And it extended strong mayor powers to the mayors of the cities of Toronto and Ottawa. This is the piece of legislation that actually implemented or established Part 6.1 of the Municipal Act, and that is titled Special Powers and Duties of the Head of Council. Bill 39, the Better Municipal Governance Act, also adopted in 2022, expanded mayoral powers by providing the head of council with the ability to propose and amend certain municipal bylaws, specifically related or relevant to prescribed provincial priorities. In support of this legislation, the province has enacted 2 or 3 regulations to accompany the legislation. Regulation 530 /22 identifies the municipalities that are subject to this legislation, and as I noted, initially that was the cities of Toronto and Ottawa. Regulation 180/23 added 26 additional municipalities, including the town of Ajax as of July 1st. And it defines provisions governing the exercise of mayoral powers. So it sets out certain procedural requirements that each head of council must follow before they can exercise those powers. And it also imposes certain limitations on those powers as well. Regulation 580/2022 applies additional specific provisions to these powers. And these are provisions around meetings, veto powers, and bylaws. And it also enumerates the provincial priorities that have been established by the province of Ontario. So for council's benefit, the province has kind of identified 2 key provincial priorities. The first is building 1.5 million new residential units before December 31st, 2031, and also constructing and maintaining infrastructure to support housing. And that includes transit, roads, utilities, and servicing. So that includes water, wastewater, electricity infrastructure, so on and so forth. So in terms of the new mayoral powers, let's kind of dive in. So the first broad category is the power of the head of council to provide direction to staff. And this direction is kind of limited in 2 significant ways. Or maybe not limited, but first and foremost is the ability to direct staff to undertake research and provide advice on policies and programs of the municipality or the powers of the head of council. And so unlike maybe kind of as is expected, the power of the mayor to provide direction to staff is fairly broad. It is not limited simply to the powers of the head of council under the new part of the legislation, but it actually has a very broad application and can include anything related to the powers of the municipality. So the mayor can provide direction to staff to conduct research on the types of programs that the municipality could implement or not implement. It's not specifically directed to the ability of the municipality to support provincial priorities. The second component is the ability of the mayor to direct staff to carry out duties related to the exercise of powers. So, for example, if a bylaw was adopted, the mayor could also direct staff after the adoption of that particular bylaw to undertake certain duties to implement the decisions of council. So that's another item that's relevant. The second category is legislative powers. And so these kind of fall into more or less kind of items related to matters that are before council. So first and foremost is the power of the head of council to require council to consider a matter. So this could be like a motion that's brought before council. As you know, like our procedure bylaw generally requires a mover and a seconder to bring something before council for consideration. These new legislative powers override provisions requiring a mover or seconder, and so gives the head of council the ability to bring something forth for consideration by council. The second piece is around, or provides the mayor with the ability to require council to vote on a bylaw before council. So as council is familiar, in September we had a bylaw, or two bylaws before council for a vote by council. And that power also includes not only the ability to require council to vote on it, so straight up or down, yes or no question, but also the power to seek approval of that bylaw by more than 1/3 of council. So we're I think quite familiar with that power here at the town of Ajax. And then the third power is the power of the mayor to veto bylaws adopted by council. And so this one is specific to provincial priorities. So if there is a bylaw which in the opinion of the mayor may interfere with a provincial priority, he does have the power under the Municipal Act now to veto that particular bylaw. One of the things that I would note is there is a provision for a council override, but that requires a 2/3 vote of council to overcome. And so if council was to adopt something by a majority vote, so 50% plus one, if that is then vetoed by council or by the mayor, then that can come back to council provided, or can be overridden, provided that 2/3 of council votes in favor of that particular bylaw. The third category is the power to determine administrative and political structures of the municipality. So I think this has for some communities been, or some commentators, been some of the more controversial components of the new legislation. So that includes the power to appoint or dismiss the chief administrative officer and heads of organizational units of the municipality. And I would note for council's benefit that the mayor has delegated that power to council. He did that on July 10th. Or the chief administrative officer. So in the case of heads of departments, that has been delegated to the CAO. The second element there is the ability to determine the organizational structure of the organization. So this really kind of aligns with how the town of Ajax structures its internal departments. That under the legislation is provided to the mayor, but again, that has been delegated to the CAO. And then finally is the power to establish committees of council, so standing committees such as the General Government Committee or the Community Affairs and Planning Committee, and appoint the chairs or vice chairs. Again, the mayor has delegated this power back to council, and the status quo remains in effect until such time as the mayor may choose to exercise those powers. So the structure that we have in place now and how we manage chairs and vice chairs remains the status quo until such time as the current mayor or maybe a future mayor chooses to amend those structures. And then the fourth and final category is budget power. So historically, council has more or less been responsible for the budget. Staff obviously have kind of drafted it and brought forth to council kind of recommendations, but it was up to council then to determine kind of what the final budget is of the municipality. That power now rests with the mayor, and so budgets coming forth will be the mayor's budget, provided that they are presented prior to February 1st. After February 1st, if a budget is not presented to council, then it reverts back to council, and council is responsible for establishing the municipal budget. The budget powers also provide the power to the mayor to veto amendments to the annual budget. So for example, as part of the budget process, council can bring amendments or adjustments to the budget. And if those are adopted by a 50% plus one vote, the mayor then has the power to veto those amendments. If those are vetoed, then again, we kind of revert back to that 2/3 vote that's required to overturn or override the mayoral veto. And then the last element is the power for the mayor to present in your budget amendments if a supplementary levy is required. So, for example, if we found ourselves in the middle of the year, we found that we did not have enough money to kind of carry out the programs and services that were anticipated, and we were required to raise a supplemental levy, then it's within the jurisdiction of the mayor to bring that forward. That's not something that can be brought forward by council. Just in terms of kind of a couple of other elements I'd like to highlight, when it comes to administrative and political structure powers, there are certain positions that are exempt from the power of the mayor to hire and fire. Those include positions such as clerk, treasurer, chief building official, fire chief, so on and so forth. Really, those statutory positions that are required to be appointed by council. So in terms of how the mayor can exercise those powers, they must be exercised in writing and in accordance with applicable regulations. There are certain elements that the mayor must kind of do to have those powers exercised reasonably or pursuant to the act. For example, when it comes to mayoral decisions and mayoral directions, there are some regulations that require information to be provided to key stakeholders and the public. So when it comes to mayoral directions to staff, those have to be documented and a written record delivered both to the clerk and the CAO. Otherwise, it's not a proper exercise of those powers. And in the case of mayoral decisions, so for example, legislative and administrative and political structure powers, a written record must be delivered to council, the clerk, and provided to the public. And we do have a link on the town's website where written records of mayoral decisions can be accessed by the public. Okay, so just finally wrapping up, there are some new rules that now apply to mayoral vacancies. So historically, council could simply appoint any individual to the position of mayor if a vacancy occurred. Given that the head of council now enjoys kind of more expansive powers than they have in the past, the province has imposed some rules about procedures to fill those positions if a vacancy occurs. So for example, if a vacancy occurs prior to March 31st in a year of an election, council is required to hold a by-election to fill the vacancy. So the ability to appoint an individual is no longer an option for council. And the individual who is elected to that position can exercise the powers under the Municipal Act. However, if that vacancy occurs after March 31st, the municipality is required to appoint an individual, but they cannot exercise those powers. Additionally, for clarity, deputy mayors and acting mayors, so for example, we saw the City of Toronto went through a by-election process. The deputy mayor assumed the role of acting mayor for an interim period. That individual or the acting mayor cannot exercise these powers. And deputy mayors cannot exercise these powers either. So it's only the duly elected individual for the office of the mayor who can exercise these new powers. So again, kind of an interesting little twist there, but I think part of this is all about kind of maintaining democratic legitimacy for the individual who is exercising these powers as mayor. And that concludes my presentation. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them as best I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a few questions. We'll start with Regional Councillor Crawford. Coming back to Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So my question is around the budget. The in-year budget, you were saying, can be adjusted by the mayor. Or you called it, what'd you call it? Levy, or it's a levy?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Crawford. In the event that there was a supplemental levy required, so for example, we needed to raise more money than was originally anticipated through the tax levy that was adopted by council or was adopted as part of the budget process. That is an instance where it's up to the mayor to determine if that's going to be the case. Historically, if there was a supplemental levy required, that would go back to council for approval. But that now rests within the sole discretion of the mayor to do so.
So he doesn't need 2/3?
No.
Really? Oh my gosh, feels like we're insignificant. Well, at budget time.
I think part of that just kind of goes back to having the mayor responsible for the budget. At the end of the day, I think the intent of the legislation is providing the head of council responsibility for that process. And there are advantages and disadvantages associated with the need to go back to the mayor for approval of a supplementary levy. And I think there are some probably likely to be some political implications associated with the decision to require a supplemental levy in the midst of the fiscal year.
So alternatively, if I wanted to add something into the budget, I would have to go through council. Is that right?
So one of the things that maybe I didn't do a great job of highlighting was just kind of the process for adoption of the municipal budget now. So historically, council would be given an opportunity to, they'd be kind of given a laundry list of things that we think are necessary, and then council would be asked to either approve or not approve those options. Now it's left to the head of council to determine what is included in the budget to be presented to council, and then council can vote to adopt amendments. So let's say the mayor's budget provides $1 million for parks. But council wants to establish a new park, and so that requires, I don't know, $500,000 of new money. Council can vote for an amendment to add $500,000 to the budget, and then it's up to the mayor whether they accept that or not, through a veto, for example. If the mayor vetoed that, then it would come back to council for 2/3 approval. If that passed, then it would kind of flow into the budget, and if you didn't get 2/3, then obviously that wouldn't be included as part of the budget. The other thing to note about the budget is council no longer formally adopts the budget. It's what is known as kind of deemed adopted. So, for example, council, the mayor presents the budget, council provides or votes on a series of amendments to the budget. There is a process whereby once council votes on those amendments and a decision by the mayor is made to veto or not veto those, and in the event there's a veto override, once that process concludes, the budget for the municipality is deemed adopted. So there's no longer any formal final vote by council on the contents of the budget. There's no formal bylaw required to say this is the budget for the municipality for the year 2024. So the mechanics of the approval of the budget have changed a little bit with this new legislative framework.
A little bit?
Maybe a bit of an understatement, but things are much different, I think, than what we encountered last year with these new powers.
So the in-year budget is interesting because essentially something could be added to the budget without even council knowing. If we're not required to have a vote, if we're not required to have like 2/3, then is that right?
Does the Director of Finance want to jump in?
Thanks, through the chair. This is all brand-new legislation for all of us. But as I understand what Mr. McWilliams is trying to come across on the supplemental levy. So to my knowledge, we've never done a supplemental levy here at the town. So this is something that's done after the fact if you're running a deficit and you need to raise more money from taxation. I believe, as I'm understanding it, the legislation is for that particular purpose. That if the municipality is running a deficit and we need to raise more money through taxation, the mayor has the ability to go and do that.
It takes transparency out of the picture.
Sorry,
That kind of-
you don't have to answer that.
No, sorry,
That's a-
I wasn't.
yeah, yeah.
It
That was a
no,
hypothetical.
No,
That
no,
was a rhetorical.
hypothetical.
Rhetorical.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, like, I'm not ever going to suggest that our mayor would be a bad mayor. That's not what I'm suggesting. But like, there's, like, you really, that's a lot of power given to one individual to create a budget line that there's. Anyway, I guess I'll just stop talking.
Thank you. Just a reminder, Mayor. No, I know. I'm teasing, of course. Next, we do have Councilor Tyler Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Jason, clerk. So it says that council cannot appoint a mayor if that became vacant. If regional councilor seats or local councilor seats became vacant, God forbid, how does that work, or has that changed as well?
Through the chair to Councillor Tyler Morin. The provisions pertaining to councillors and regional councillors continue to be the same as they always have. It's ultimately up to council's discretion to determine whether to call for a by-election to fill that seat or to appoint an individual. And there are a number of different considerations that council would want to consider as part of that process, but there's nothing that now requires us to hold a bylaw or to appoint or whatever the case may be.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Councilor Henry.
Thank you. Before I start my questions, I just want to verify how we became to have strong mayor powers for the town of Ajax was through signing a housing pledge, correct?
I believe through the chair to Councillor Henry that is part of the rationale that the province has kind of laid out for why these powers have been provided to the town of Ajax. Not only that the town signed a housing pledge, but also that I think the population of the town is over 100,000 and continues or is anticipated to be one of those areas in the province that will see significant population growth between now and 2031.
The reason I ask this of you is because the former minister, Clark, went on CP24 and made a statement shortly after stating, when asked why Newmarket didn't have the powers, is because they did not sign the housing pledge. So I asked this to staff. When we were asked to sign the housing pledge, at that time, there was no information to us, to you as staff, to us as council, saying that this was a
sorry, Councilor Henry?
prerequisite.
We just have CEO Baker who wants to jump in.
Yes, of course.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and wade in here. Initially, the strong mayor's powers were given to all municipalities that basically sat on the Ontario Big City Mayors Association. So all municipalities with mayors, initially it was given to Toronto, Ottawa, and was it?
Toronto and Ottawa originally.
That was it. And then there were rumors that it would be extended to all mayors who served a population over 100,000, which were all the mayors that sat on the entire Big City Mayors Association. And then that was announced prior to July 1st. And then there was further discussion of other municipalities that would be considered to be included if they signed the housing pledge. But Ajax's initiation into that group of having strong mayor's powers were not initiated based on the housing pledge. That was something that was based on our population size.
And there's nothing in the legislation stating anything about the housing pledge, correct?
Sorry?
There's nothing in the legislation that dictates the requirements for strong mayor, right? So
No.
I do want to kind of keep this to the legislation because this is our clerk's kind of outline. So I don't want to kind of go into why we think certain things happen that he cannot speak on.
That's why I'm asking about the legislation piece of it, because there was a comment made by the former minister, and that's why I'm asking
Sure.
that. So to our knowledge, and through the comments that the CEO just made, we were given this power because we were part of a municipality that had over 100,000 people, correct?
It, yes, it was population-based, and it was all of the members who were in the Ontario Big City Mayors Association at that time, the top 26 municipalities. And this is my own perception of what was happening at the time. There were other mayors that were asking, well, why is it stopping there? And I think there was kind of an olive branch that was put out by the minister saying, if you are, the intent of the legislation is to help us build more homes. If you're willing to, you know, come forward with a pledge, then we will consider it. I think that's my perception, only my personal opinion of what the comments were related to.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I'd like to ask with regards to the budget, if I can ask the Director of Finance, just to understand, because last year was my first budget process. So it's going to be different this year, so we're changing it up again. So last year we had a look at the budget, we could go through it, we could critique it, we could ask you questions, we could ask that things be adjusted accordingly. At the end, we had a final vote. This year, that will not be exactly as so. So there will be a budget presented to us from the mayor, correct? A budget that the mayor has approved, and we see the budget that he's approved, not necessarily the budget that you would have brought forward. Is that correct?
Through the chair. So the mayor has given staff a directive to continue to prepare the budget as we would have done in the past. So we are working on that premise right now. Staff are working and we are consolidating the budget. Staff will be working with the mayor to review and ensure that he is aligned with the recommendations that staff are bringing forward. There are legislated timetables. There is a legislated timing through this legislation on the vetoes and amendments that come forward. So I believe that there will be some further documentation coming to council next week, or sorry, at our next meeting on some of those timelines. But the intention is that council will have that opportunity, still have that opportunity to sit down with myself to go and review the budget. So you'll have that time to review the budget yourselves, ask questions, same process. But it will ultimately be the mayor's budget that will be brought forward.
Clarification. In between the time that staff works with the mayor for the budget and the time that we as council see the budget, there can be changes made to the budget without council's knowledge, with only the mayor's knowledge? Is that correct or not?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, so we're not going to get like, this was the budget before the mayor seen it kind of playbook list, and here's the budget the mayor's presenting kind of playbook list to see what's been taken out or changed or added. Is that correct?
Through the chair, likely no.
Likely not. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. With regards to the bylaw and vacancies and for the mayor, which I don't see this happening, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. Let's say that this happens and we have a vacancy with the mayor. And let's say, because presumably we'd have to have a by-election if it was before a certain period of time. If that was to happen and it was somebody on this council or multiple people on this council that went for that position, what then happens, and they were successful, even one, and there's a vacant position where they were, what then happens then? There's an appointment or there's a by-election for their position as well?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Henry. So in the event that there was a vacancy in the position of mayor and a current serving member of council happened to be the successful candidate as part of a by-election for that role, there's a couple of things that are required of council. So first is a requirement for council to declare that seat vacant. There's a timeline for that to be completed, and off the top of my head, I think it's 30 days, but please don't quote me. Once the seat has been declared vacant, then council needs to determine how do they want to fill that position. They can choose to fill that position by-election, or they can choose to fill it by appointment. And then if council happen to choose to fill that position by appointment, then obviously staff would kind of undertake the work necessary. So, for example, like asking for applications for the position and then bringing them before council as part of a special meeting, for example. If council directed a bylaw, then staff would proceed to host a by-election, then staff would proceed to execute a by-election as required under the Municipal Elections Act. Again, that's all dependent on the timing of that vacancy. If it happened before March 31st in the year of election, then there's kind of two options available to council. After March 31st, then I think, I don't have the legislation in front of me at the moment, but I believe any vacancy occurring after March 31st in a year of an election, whether that is for the head of council or for any other position on council, must be filled by appointment. And part of the reason for that is just to avoid the expense and necessity to hold a by-election mere months in many cases away from a general municipal election.
Which makes total sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But there's no way that council could appoint, or sorry, there's no way that one councillor would take, like, let's say it's Ward 3. I'm just going to go crazy because it's not my ward. And let's say, you know, one stepped up and then there was one left. They couldn't take over both regional and local position in a short 5-month period. You would have to appoint somebody, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry. There's no kind of succession plan. There's no opportunity for an individual to serve multiple offices. One individual can only serve in one office at a time. So an individual could not concurrently serve as councillor and regional councillor
At the same
on
time.
council.
Okay, thank you. With regards to page 56 of my presentation package here, I'm going back to this, provincial priorities. I notice here construction and maintenance infrastructure to support housing, including transit, roads, utilities, servicing. I'm not seeing schools in here. And I know that schools are not part of the municipality. They are part of the school boards. But I also know that there's land within every municipality sitting there waiting for the threshold. I believe it's 280 students to form a school. I can't remember off the top of my, but it was around there, 280 students to form a school. So I'm wondering where this provincial priority falls within that, because we obviously need schools. Is there a tie-in to the school board in this?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry. There's no express connection between these powers and the roles and Education Act. However, I think a strong argument could potentially be made that some of the infrastructure that's required to support housing could conceivably include schools. How the head of council could exercise those powers in a way that kind of compels the school boards to undertake certain actions, it's hard for me to see, but I think a strong case could be made that education and schools are part of the infrastructure that's required to support housing.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, thank you for that. My final question is with regards to page 59 and the direction with regards to the CAO's powers for hiring and firing. Prior to the strong mayor's power in a municipality, I'll just use our municipality, who was responsible for that? Was that always the CAO? Was that human resources?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry. So generally speaking, absent the strong mayor powers that provide responsibility for employment matters to the head of council, that would have largely been the role of the chief administrative officer in terms of determining whether to hire or fire department heads. Or in other instances, maybe in positions lower down in the organization, it would have been the decision of maybe the relevant department head in conjunction with the CAO and HR.
Through a process of HR, correct?
Correct. I mean, there would be kind of a mechanism, and there is a mechanism in this organization as well to kind of address or manage employment matters. And generally speaking, the CAO is part of those discussions prior to any decision being taken.
And has that
Sorry,
changed?
CEO Baker just wants to jump in very quickly. Go ahead.
Oh, of course.
Sorry to interrupt. So I just wanted to clarify. So prior to the strong mayor's powers, all staff report eventually up to the chief administrative officer. So as was noted by Jason, if there was an issue in a department head would, and I had asked all departments that if there were seeking to terminate an employee, whether it be part-time or other, that I be made aware and it be discussed with me. So that process was in place. As far as department heads goes, that rests, the hiring and firing rests with council as well as the CAO. And so if for some reason I felt that there was a need to discuss something about a department head, I would have to bring that to council for council's consideration. When the strong mayor's powers came out, spoke to the mayor about keeping that delegated authority in place because there was a lot of angst amongst staff ranks as to what might happen going forward. And he was amenable to that, and that was one of his directives, was to delegate that back to me, but basically the structure that was before remains in place today.
So clarification point, and thank you for jumping in. You made it a little bit easier. So moving forward, if there was a need to dismiss a director, you would bring that back to council for approval in a special council close meeting?
Same process we would have done before, yes.
Sorry, I wasn't here. I don't.
Yes.
Yes.
So it would be a report that would come forward to council in a closed session, yes,
In the closed session.
for council's consideration and approval.
And if we said no, then that would be it.
Well, there's a directive that it's been delegated to the former process, but there's nothing to say the directive may be withdrawn. So I'm just.
What does that mean?
The mayor can always undelegate. his
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's, so what you're saying is,
And maybe
if the mayor, a mayor, not our mayor, any mayor,
Right.
felt strong enough, they could say, I gave you the power to make the decision, don't feel you made the right one, taking back my power to make the decision. Correct?
There is nothing in place for me to enforce his directive that he's delegated to me.
Got it. Got it. You answered that quite well. Thank you. That's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Thank you very much for this, Mr. McWilliam. Very much appreciate it. So some of my questions have been asked, but just to confirm, the delegated administrative and hiring and firing practices that the mayor has given to remain status quo can be revoked at any time?
through the chair to you, Councillor Bauer, that is correct. Even in spite of the delegation, the mayor does continue to retain the statutory power afforded to him under the Municipal Act. So even in spite of the delegation, he does retain those powers and could choose to exercise those powers at any time.
Thank you. And would that be considered something that 2/3 members of council could override?
Those powers are specifically within his realm of jurisdiction. And when it comes to the termination of staff, like that is outside of council's sphere of jurisdiction and is exclusively the mayor's to be exercised.
Okay, thank you. There was another comment in your presentation about certain items must be provided to stakeholders and the public in writing. And part of that is the direction, mayoral direction. So is council considered a stakeholder? Like when he gives direction to staff, the relevant staff is given that notice in writing. Is it a requirement for council to also receive that?
through the chair to Councillor Bauer, it depends on the context in which the mayor is exercising powers. So when it comes to his statutory powers under the act to make decisions about the political structure of the organization, council is a stakeholder who requires or will receive notice of the mayor's decision. When it comes to the powers to direct staff, council is not a noted stakeholder in the legislation, and there's no requirement for the mayor to provide notice to council in those instances.
Okay, thank you. And I think the Director of Finance did sort of talk about this for the amendments and vetoes process. So none of that's not going to just drop and happen on the floor, correct? That there's a process where we will do all of this, prior to this budget being approved?
The process to adopt, approve amendments, that will happen as part of the council meetings that will be held to approve both the capital and operating budgets. Those will not occur, to my knowledge, prior to those meetings.
So the public meeting, so if I wanted to have amendments, I would bring those and present them
That is
live?
correct.
Okay, and then the veto happens live?
So the veto would happen, the mayor has a period after the adoption of those amendments to determine whether he chooses to exercise his veto powers or not. So it won't happen, at least I don't imagine it would happen in the midst of a meeting. I mean, conceivably it could, but I think in all likelihood, the exercise of the veto power is something that would follow a council meeting after the mayor has an opportunity to reflect on the amendments that have been brought forward and the implications that those amendments may have for the municipal budget.
Okay, and then the timing between a veto and a 2/3 override of a veto is what?
I believe, I don't have the number in front of me. Again, as Director Valentin noted, there is a report coming to council.
Oh, yeah,
To
that's
the next council meeting that does kind of highlight the budget timelines and some other considerations that staff are bringing forth to council for consideration.
Okay, and an amendment means either an addition or a retraction?
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Barham, CEO Baker wants to jump in.
Oh, sure.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Even though, Jason's giving the very technical answers and as to what the actual legislation says and where the powers are and so on, we have been working with the mayor to try, in a number of cases, keep things as status quo as possible because they worked well. One of them was the budget process. So early on, we spoke to the mayor about, instead of us sitting down with you and going through and talking to you about what you think your budget should be, we would appreciate if you would give us the direction to go back and start our budgeting process like we always would, where the departments put together their budgets and we, finance compiles it and so on, and then we could sit down with you and take it from there, which he was amenable to that, no issue. Diane's going to answer some of your questions regarding timing, because we also talked to him about, okay, once the budget has been put together, council should be given the opportunity to look through it so that they can develop their questions. So if you can talk about that a little bit.
Through the chair. So as CEO Baker mentioned, we are working with the mayor. We are putting together the draft budget. We will be reviewing it with the mayor, but we will be, under the legislation, the budget will be released to members of council in December. And the public meeting, so we're trying to keep as close to our budget timetable that was presented in June. And the date at that point was January 15th that we would bring forward, and it would be a public meeting. The mayor, although it is his mayor, he is trying to keep it as similar as the past. So any members of the public that would like to speak, he's inviting them to make delegations at that time as well. And that will be the opportunity as well for members of council to bring forward any amendments.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And those are my questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Lee.
Thank you. We have Regional Councillor Dias.
Thank you. Just one question regarding, I guess, public information, particularly when it pertains to provincial priorities such as housing. What kind of information does the public get? So do they get notifications, say, of an upcoming meeting? Do they get an agenda or a report? How do we inform the public?
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Dyes. There's nothing in the legislation that requires the municipality to conduct business in any different fashion as is currently the case. So the town does have its public notice policy that establishes certain requirements for us in terms of giving notice to the public. When it comes to council agendas and reports, again, we do have a process in place to disseminate information about those meetings and the items that are on the agendas on the town's website. But generally speaking, there's nothing in the legislation that requires the town to do business in any other fashion, as has historically been the case. So there's nothing that requires us to provide specific notification of instances where council will be considering a matter that has bearing on a provincial priority.
So is that the case if there's a special meeting on a provincial priority?
Correct. Generally speaking, we will continue to follow our established business processes to provide notice to the public of when a special meeting will be held. So that includes kind of posting information to the town's website, sharing information on social media, if time allows, providing information in our community pages, advertisement. But there's, again, nothing in the legislation that requires us to go over and above our established processes.
Thank you.
Councillor Lang, you have further questions?
Thank you, through the chair. Going back to the budget, this is my concern, and if someone can tell me how to alleviate this concern or if there's a remedy. Let's say staff has worked with the mayor, have worked with CAO, they've created the budget in the regular process. Then there's consultation with the mayor, the budget's released to us as council. In between that time period, if things have come out of the budget, and we might not have noticed what came out of the budget till after the fact, is there a way that we can be informed what came out of the budget?
So
I don't know if that goes to the CAO or...
I think a presentation is coming to council. So I think you should save your question for then. Right now, we're just specifically dealing with the strong mayor powers overall. And if you have a budget-specific question, you're probably best to wait for the report to come back to us first regarding timelines.
Wouldn't this be a legislation question, though? Because maybe it is a legislation question because it goes to the procedure of it. So maybe it is a legislative question. Maybe I framed it wrong. So, and thank you for that. Thank you for repointing me there. I would take that to the legislation then. Is there a framework for this that councils, and I guess it's a general question for all councils, that are we going to be missing pieces of the budget that we're not realizing there's things missing, and is there a procedure?
It's I'm going to rule the question out of order. Like you can't ask him to answer like a hypothetical on our behalf. Like whether we would miss something is inappropriate to ask the clerk in this case. So again, my suggestion, if it's budget related, let's wait till the budget presentation, and then all your questions will absolutely be in order in terms of timelines and feedback.
Can I try one more time with a legislation question only?
Say it. Let's hear it, please.
Let me try one more time. I'm probably going to fail, but I'm going to try. Legislatively, with the change in the timelines, is there anything...
I feel like you're just rewording your question.
I feel like I am too.
So honestly,
I'm going to drop it.
I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, I'm going to drop it. I'm trying to find another way to do it, but I can't seem to. So I'm going to wait.
And perhaps write your question ahead of time to staff, and they might be able to prepare a more fluent answer for you.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. After that, then any other further questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. McWilliam. Moving on to the agenda, I see nothing in the closed session. That just leaves adjournment. Can I get a mover? I see Councillor Tyler Morin. All in favor? By vote. Thank you very much. Everyone have a fantastic day. Thank you, staff.